Tanner Ames wants to be bipartisan in Congress and work with Nancy Pelosi? That's scary.
You know, when we conservatives talk about small government, the progressives immediately start shrieking about what the country would look like with no government at all. But that's not what we're talking about, and we both know it. You can't have a civilization without some form of government. I just want a government that's going to fit back in the box that it originally came in. So, what do you need to have good government? Well, some of the smartest, best educated minds in history thought that over, not for a few days or weeks, but for their entire adult lives. They read the histories of every civilization that had ever existed, trying to find some recurring themes. And they did find some recurring themes, and here's a few of them. Concentration of power. This is bad. Give total power to one guy and you get murderers like these guys here. Now, back in 1215 in England, they had someone of that stripe, King John, who governed in the style of the day. That style was known as vis et voluntas. That's Latin for force and will. Basically, King John took whatever he wanted, just like every other king and emperor before him. John, however, was such a piece of crap that the barons that ruled their estates in John's name finally said, hey, you know what, F it, we're done. And they took King John to a table and they made him sign away the power of force and will. He signed an agreement with the rebellious barons called the Magna Carta Libertatum, the Great Contract of Freedom. England was no longer ruled by one nasty king. Now it was ruled by 25 nasty barons, but this Magna Carta was the first time in history that someone had limited the power of the king. Now this led the founding fathers to their second recurring theme of good government, the rule of law. This means that those whose heads get chopped off is no longer decided by one paranoid degenerate having a bad day. Introducing the rule of law meant that there were rules for what was allowed and what was not, and those rules were written down so that anyone could read them. And the rule of law meant that no one, no king, no baron, no shah or sultan, no one was above the law. The rule of law applied to everybody. Okay, said the founders, that's good. Laws are good, but who makes the laws? What if those people suck too? Well, 2,000 years before the signing of the Magna Carta, the ancient Greeks lived in something called a city-state. That's basically a walled city that was its own country. Now, in one of these city-states called Athens, these regular Greeks got it into their heads that the people themselves could make the laws and that they all had to live by them. In the Greek language, that meant that the demos, the people, would hold all of the kratia. In English, that means the power. This demokratia, democracy, was an awesome idea. But if it was such an awesome idea, why did it die out 2,000 years before our founding fathers were born? Well, it turns out there's a serious flaw in democracy, and it's simple, really. Some people are idiots, and some people are bastards. And some people are idiot bastards. Athens fell because the Athenian leader, Pericles, got everyone all liquored up about fighting the Spartans. The Spartans! The Athenians voted for war. 27 years of war later, Athens was in ruins, and so was democracy. A democracy can be dangerous because people do stupid things. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany because millions of Germans had voted for him and his National Socialist Party. Then these guys, the German Parliament, or the Reichstag, voted 441 to 84 to give Adolf Hitler absolute power. And that was a bad idea. So, finally, these dead white males realized that you could not put a fence around the power. It just didn't work that way. But you could build a wall around the individual. You could build a wall of individual rights. That's why, contrary to most people's belief, the United States is not a democracy. The United States is a republic. Now, there are many elements of a democracy. The people elect the president and the Congress and so on, but there is a wall of human rights, not around the government, but around the people, that stops these lying, greedy half-wits who seek political power from punching people in the nose and stealing all of their candy. The Constitution of the United States exists to distribute personal political power. The president has power, that's true, but Congress has power too, and so does the Supreme Court. These three branches of government, the executive, legislative, and the judicial, are constantly screaming and yelling and poking and slapping and biting each other. If one of them gets drunk, the other two tie him to a bed for a while, and they write on its face with Sharpies and wait for it to sober up. Now, here's one final cool little twist. Virtually everyone in America knows that the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, gives us freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble and peacefully protest, and so on. And virtually everyone in America is wrong. The Bill of Rights does no such thing. The First Amendment says that freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the freedom to protest is built into every human being the minute that they come into this world. The First Amendment simply says that the government does not have the power to take that right away. Good government is not a player. Good government is the referee. Referees aren't allowed to call penalties against one team and not the other. Referees do not intercept passes and then run them back for touchdowns. And referees do not make up the rules as they go along. Now, try to imagine a Super Bowl where both teams are comprised exclusively of referees and there are 22 penalty flags being thrown on every single play. If you can then also imagine that there are 100,000 referees in the stadium and each one of them is constantly screaming out 100,000 rule changes, and 2 or 3 players are shuffling around looking frightened and confused, well then you will understand why conservatives don't like big government. A corporation is defined as a company or a group of people authorized to act as a single entity, legally a person, and recognized as such in law. Now, you can often hear social justice warriors shrieking that corporations are not people. So what does legally a person mean? Well, it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, let's say FedEx goes out and buys a new delivery truck. FedEx has 265 million shares owned by thousands and thousands of real-life human people who decided they like FedEx, so they went out and bought a piece of it. Now, having all of those thousands and thousands of names on one vehicle registration card is going to pretty much fill up the entire truck, and it might also be inconvenient if every paycheck that the FedEx driver receives had to be signed by thousands and thousands and thousands of people who own FedEx. That's why we say the truck is owned by FedEx. That's what legally a person means. Now, the smallest corporations are me. I have an LLC, that stands for Limited Liability Company, probably the simplest form of corporation. My corporation has one shareholder, also me, and we have assets totaling literally thousands of dollars. But big or small, all corporations limit an individual's liability. In a nutshell, that means that if BillWhittle.com were to go broke, then creditors could take everything that the business owns, but they could not take everything that I own. Now, why does this matter? Well, if the limited liability wasn't there, we wouldn't have much of anything because no one would provide the upfront money to start a business in the first place. That's because investors are people willing to risk their own money on something new. Having a corporation means if things go south, you could still lose your shirt, but you won't lose the whole farm. People will risk their shirts. Very few people are willing to bet the entire farm, and that's why limited liability allows businesses to get started. Now, this next part might be very difficult for you SJWs to understand, so I'm going to say it very slowly. How many of you are writing Facebook posts condemning corporations, and you're doing it on Apple devices powered by electrical turbines made by General Electric, running on oil or natural gas produced by ExxonMobil, sipping a pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks as you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars loaned to your parents by Morgan Chase so that you could get your degree in Italian Renaissance poetry, and generally enjoy another day not spent coughing up blood and pieces of lung from the tuberculosis that you did not get due to the drugs manufactured by Johnson & Johnson. If you're employed, your paycheck is virtually certain to be coming from a corporation. If you're not employed, then your money comes from parents who are getting paid by a corporation. And if you are 100% on government benefits, then your check is being written by a federal or state agency that gets their money from taxing corporations and also by taxing the individuals that get paid by corporations. Now, Enron, ExxonMobil, Apple, all of the rest are publicly owned. That means right this second, you can make a phone call and a very, very friendly man will instantly sell you a piece of FedEx, say in exchange for your $200 and of course a small fee. Drop 2 Benjamins, buy 1 share, and you are now a FedEx owner. You greedy, miserable corporate swine. If FedEx gets more successful over time, you can sell that piece for more than you paid for it. This is called making a profit. Of course, the value of that share could also go down as well. That's called a loss. Oh, one more thing. If you think it's unfair that a corporation doesn't pay you more when it's making money, well, it's not unfair. It's not unfair because none of you have to take less money if the corporation is not doing well. You know, something like 94% of all businesses fail before 10 years have gone by. Owning a business is like standing next to a fast-moving river, a river of money. Huge amounts of money come in and huge amounts of money go right back out in the form of rent, electricity, insurance, payroll, and of course, buying all the stuff you need to make what you sell. Being a small business owner is like standing on the river's edge and dipping a small tin cup into that swirling mass of money. Then the government takes about half of what you have in that small tin cup, and anything left is all yours. 19 times out of 20, there's nothing left, and you're out of business. The employees got paid, the government got paid, and you got squat, you corporate fat cat. Now here's the final point. If you start a charity called Save the World from Corporate Greed, then there is a 100% chance that Save the World from Corporate Greed, LLC, will be a corporation and a legal person as well. So go ahead, do it. Then you can just protest against yourself, and you can leave the rest of us alone so that we can get back to work. This economic system called capitalism is very simple, really. First, it requires private property. This skyscraper is private property, and this hoodie is private property too. You know, before capitalism, if you were a common person, you didn't own anything. The state or the king or the duke or the emir or the emperor or the whoever owned all of the land and everything on it, and much of the time they owned you as well. The ability for a common person to have something that belongs to him or her is an earth-shaking innovation historically. And second, capitalism needs a free market. Individuals need to be able to buy and sell their private property, and these trades are voluntary. It's this non-coercive, voluntary ability to buy and sell in your own personal interest that makes capitalism so morally superior to socialism, aristocracies, dictatorships, or anything else where someone else determines what's in your best interest. Freedom and capitalism go hand in hand, and you cannot have one existing without the other. But the main reason capitalism is the bomb is because of one exceedingly simple idea. Your work and your reward are tied together. Capitalism works because it rewards and incentivizes us to do more work than we would otherwise have to. Let's imagine a caveman. He and his clan live up in the mountains. They're hunters who eat meat, and because they're hunters, they make incredible spears. They're straight and strong with razor-sharp flint spearheads, and they're covered in elaborate carvings for good magic. But they don't do much gathering up there, so their baskets kind of look like birds' nests. Now, down in the valley is another tribe. They grow their own food and go out every day to harvest it and bring it home. Since they do very little hunting, their spears are just thin sticks that break almost every time, but their baskets are so well made that they can almost hold water. Now, one day, a guy from the hunter tribe meets a guy from the gatherer tribe in the Midlands, and these two proto-geniuses decide to make a trade. One well-built, powerful spear for one well-made, intricate basket. The spearmaker goes back up to the caves. Everyone comes out to marvel at the wonderful basket. No one's ever seen anything like it. He is now the wealthiest man in the clan because he has something that everybody wants and no one else has. Now, here's the actual miracle. If that caveman's a socialist, he's going to lend out the basket to the tribe and it's going to get banged up and people want to hog it, and that leads to several murders until eventually the basket just falls apart. But this proto-capitalist genius stares at the cave ceiling all night and he says to himself, Trevor, you need to make 2 spears a week in order to survive because that's how many get lost or broken. But if you stay up later at night and get up earlier in the morning, I'll bet you could make an extra 3 spears per week. Then he realizes that his daughter's not going to starve to death after all, because his idiot son-in-law is going to come in and help him make spears instead of flinging poo at saber-toothed tigers all day. Now, fortunately, the gatherer is also a free trade capitalist, and a few days later, they meet to exchange 3 wonderful spears for 3 excellent baskets, and each goes back home. Now, it is true that both the spear maker and the basket maker will have amassed more shiny pebbles or seashells than the others, in other words, more money. But who loses here? The more trading they do, the more common these items become. And the price goes down on baskets the same way it goes down on 4K televisions as more and more of those are made. Pretty soon, everybody has a better basket than they ever imagined possible. And in the other village, everyone has an incredible spear. Everybody is wealthier, everybody's life is improved, and you would think that would make everybody happy, but not quite. Because there are a few bastards up there who do not think about the awesome baskets that they now have when they didn't have them before. All they can think about is how many shiny stones the guy who did all the work has. These people are bitter, envious, and miserable. They contribute nothing but grief and whining. Eventually, they became known as Democrats. Socialism is an economic system where high and low incomes are essentially tossed into a giant pot called the state and then redistributed more or less equally. That's why so many people think that socialism is more fair than capitalism. But let's see how fair all of this sharing really is. Let's take 10 randomly selected people and put them on a football field and tell them to run the 100 yards from one goal line to the other. Now, equality of opportunity, that's capitalism, means that everyone starts at the same line. No one should be allowed to start ahead. No one should be held behind. And when they start running, some people are going to run faster, some are going to run slower, and this creates unequal results. People cross the finish line at different times based on how fast they can run. Now, socialists think it's unfair that some people can run faster than others and that some are left behind. They want people's cars, houses, salaries, all the rest of it to be more or less the same. The equality of socialism is not equality of opportunity, but equality of result. Equality of opportunity means everyone starts from the same line at the same time. Equality of result means that everyone finishes at the same line and at the same time. Now, here's why socialism sucks. If everyone is forced to finish at the same time, then the entire race has to be run at the speed of the slowest runner. You can't run faster than you can run, and that means that every single one of the other people on the field have to be slowed down. Aha, you say, but socialism means that the fastest people go back and carry the slowest ones over the line. But like it or not, people do not behave that way. And I can prove it, because if you're one of those people who call yourselves socialists, well, then you should take your iPhones and your Xboxes down to a pawn shop, collect the cash, and distribute the money to the homeless. Some people are all about wealth redistribution when it's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them, but when it's time to redistribute their own wealth, all of a sudden they're rock-ripped capitalists. The fastest runners do not go back and carry the slowest ones, and if they're forced to do so, then they simply do less work and slow down. I mean, why? Why run as fast as you can when the faster you go, the more weight you have to carry? Why study like hell for 15 years in order to become a brain surgeon when you're just going to get the same paycheck, the same house, the same car as a barista at Starbucks? You bust your butt for 15 years studying for your entire youth, and then most of that work gets taken away from you by force to pay someone who does nothing but get high and play video games all day? That's fair? Socialism doesn't turn baristas into brain surgeons. Socialism turns brain surgeons into baristas, and it gets worse. Socialism doesn't work because it's a pyramid fraud. Now, that's where the first ones in get paid by those who pay to get in second, and so on. A pyramid fraud pays off only when there are constantly more and more people coming in at the bottom to pay those above them. If you run out of people at the bottom, well, then you're boned. 4 people can work hard enough to support one person for his entire life, but one person cannot support 4. And for decades now, the population of these European socialist countries are not growing, but rather shrinking. So in order to keep the pyramid scheme going, they have to import new people from high birth rate places who, generally speaking, are not that interested in putting in a lifetime of work to support other people. They're interested in all of the free socialist benefits, and many of them are interested, very interested, in their religion. Oh, and by the way, Fidel Castro, socialist hero, champion of the new socialist working man and woman who work as hard for other people as they do for themselves and who share everything equally. Well, Fidel died recently. Cuban socialism meant that his people barely had enough to eat for 3 generations, but at least they were all starving equally. When socialist icon Fidel Castro died, his personal net worth was $900 million. Suckers. The dictionary says that money is a medium of exchange. Okay, an exchange of what? If I give you 2 green pieces of paper with 20 printed on them, that's 40 bucks. And in exchange for that, you mow my lawn, what is it that we have actually exchanged? Well, the answer is not work. You could sweat for an hour using a pushing mower or an easy 10 minutes on a riding mower, and I don't care, it's still worth 40 bucks to me. So we're not charging money for how much effort you put into the job, and we're not charging money for your time either. You know, the Mona Lisa took about 12 years to finish. It's insured for about $800 million. If I spend 24 years painting a woman's face, that does not mean that that painting is going to be twice as much as the Mona Lisa. So we're not exchanging work and we're not exchanging time. What we're exchanging is value. I've got more money than time. You've got more time than money. We both have something of value and we both have something that we want. So who determines that freshly cut grass has $40 worth of value? Who actually sets the price? Well, in a free society, a capitalist society, we both do. You could charge $400 to mow my lawn, but I'm not going to pay $400. You're not the only person out there mowing lawns. You're overvaluing a mowed lawn at 400 bucks. Charge that much, and other people will do it for less, and I mean a lot less. How much less? Well, let's say I wanted to pay you $1 to mow my lawn. You wouldn't do it. That would be undervaluing a mowed lawn. So you want to raise the value of mowing the lawn, I want to lower it, and 40 bucks is the neighborhood where we're both more or less happy. Now, these 2 track shoes cost more or less the same amount of materials and labor to make, but this Champion men's C9 costs $29 at Target. The Nike Lab Air Zoom lists for $250. Now, the person who sets the price of both pairs of these shoes is you. Money means that you get to decide whether to mow 1 yard and get the Target shoes or mow 7 yards to get the Nikes. Money isn't good and money isn't evil because money doesn't care who owns it. Money doesn't care if you're black or white, old or young, straight or gay, conservative or liberal, a kind mother or a museum-grade bastard. Money flows to where the demand is. In a free market, in a free society, the person who decides what is in demand is you. And in a capitalist country, the person who gets to decide where to exchange the stored value of all of those lawns that you mowed is you.
Hello, BillWhittle.com members and non-members too. We're opening this one up to the public because this is part 2 of what I'm calling the new robber barons, the monopolists of this digital age of ours. The story broke late last week of the Google engineer who wrote a pro-diversity memo that acknowledged sex differences between men and women, and of course he was canned on Monday night for daring to expose or to express actual diversity in the face of diversity groupthink at Google. And I got to thinking, there's a bigger story here. It's Google not just treating its employers as an oppressor, but also treating its customers as a monopolist would. You look at what happens with censorship on YouTube and on Facebook as well, which owns a virtual monopoly in in personal networking. And you've got Apple, which is the largest corporation in the world. And who am I missing out here? I know I must be missing one. But these huge digital companies have the ability at times to run roughshod over their customers while they reap billions of dollars in profits. And let me tell you just how these are run, gents. This one's scary. Breitbart put together a great piece showing all of these public statements by Google executives on how they treat their employees. And I picked one out of here for you. It's Google's Colin Winter who wrote, this is a quote, "One of the great things about Google's internal communications mechanism is that as a manager, I can easily go find out if I really want to work with you." So this is a warning. He says, "I keep a written blacklist of people whom I will never allow on or near my team based on how they view and treat their coworkers." That blacklist got a little bit longer today. Bill, we've talked before about this, about the impossibility of breaking up a company like Facebook because it's a network. You can't just stop people from joining a network. Or Google, which is essentially a search engine, and you can't split off YouTube because it would go broke without Google's deep pockets. What kind of antitrust action can you take against a virtual monopolist like this?
And this is the problem, right?
Yeah,
this is the ethical problem we find ourselves in. On one hand, we understand as conservatives that these are private companies, that we opt into them, and that's a voluntary act on our part. We pay them. They're owned by individuals, and those individuals can do whatever they want with their company because that's their company. And I think that has to basically trump everything, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But there is a compelling case to be made that since so much of the world's communication now travels through these venues, Facebook, Google, and to some extent YouTube, but certainly Facebook and Google, so much interpersonal communication is shared through these two networks that it is in fact a public utility. And if it was being run fairly, there would be no problem. But here's where I think if I had to make a legal case for it, here's where I would make the case. Google is not informing me that my opinions, and Facebook too, is not informing me that my political opinion is going to impact how much my message gets spread and who sees it and by whom. And they're not informing me how much they're suppressing it and how much they're advancing their political point of view. So on some level, I would make the case that, while I'm sure it's buried on page 270 of the terms of agreement that everybody clicks on, they are not, in fact, providing full disclosure to their clients, because if they are filtering for political views, then they are doing something that I certainly am not aware of while they're doing it, right? I think that's probably where I would go with it. I know I spoke to the marketing director of Prager University. He said something like they did 250 million views last year. They've done 300 million this year already.
Wow.
And something like 23 of their videos, which we all know are absolutely vulgarity-free, using simple animated backgrounds. 23, I think was the number, 21, 23, have been put on the "you must be over 18 to watch."
Because of dangerous ideas that if you're 17 and a half, you shouldn't be allowed to watch.
Well, just the fact that they can simply arbitrarily say. Now, YouTube said that, no, it's just the algorithm. You did one on the Korean War, and, we want to protect families from war and violent imagery. To which I say, have you seen the numbers on any of these live game streams, which get 100 million views of people taking knives and slitting people's throats and blowing them up against the wall? So that's nonsense. And he also said, look, if it was an algorithm, what happens when sometimes people will just steal a video? They'll do that for me or for Right Angle. They'll just download it, upload it to their channel. Digitally, it is the exact same file, but there's no under 18 filter being applied to somebody who's not Prager University. Finally, somebody from YouTube emailed this guy and said, no, it's done by humans. And we had a number of people review them, and we all agreed on all 21 of them that they should be made 18 or older. So there's no question it's happening. That's a form of fraud. And I am not going to be the guy calling for government regulations on a private business. I'm just not going to be that guy. But there is a form of fraud here, and that, I think, is where I would go with it. All
right, Scott, let me, here's the conundrum we're in, I guess is how I want to phrase this. even though Google and Facebook kind of ghettoize people with conservative or libertarian viewpoints, and now are in the business of firing employees who deviate from the party line, we still find these services to be useful. We upload our right angles to YouTube. We share them on Facebook, and although they are denying us traffic that we should earn, they still give us just enough traffic to keep us going. What do we do to break this vicious cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, Bill made that analogy that it's like a public utility. And this would be like me saying, well, I'm really upset with the electric company, so from now on, I'm going to generate all my electricity here. I'm just going to do it. Yeah. I'm going to do it on site. It's possible to do that. It's just incredibly difficult.
And try and get the permits, right?
Yeah. And so, my thorium reactor installation permit is coming up any month now. That's right. So it just, you want to say, like, I don't want to have to be the guy who goes to Bing. I'm not going to Bing.
We have our standards. I may plead, but I would never beg.
That's right. I have been on Bing before. I cannot stand it. And Google does a lot of good things for my life, and it facilitates a lot of things that make life easier for me. So as Stephen Green, you've said oft times before, I'm sure quoting somebody whose name I now forget, that the remedy for bad speech is not no speech, it's more speech. It's being able to fight back. It's being able to make videos like this and basically say, hey, don't be evil, Google, Mr. Credo that starts with don't be evil. This is evil. You've started off with evil in this situation. You took an employee who expressed an unpopular opinion and you blackballed him. You kicked him out. You cut off his sustenance. And frankly, you've harmed the industry. You've harmed him with the industry as a result of that. So it's not going to be real easy for him to just jump to some other tech company in Silicon Valley. But the reality is that Google's not doing this at the behest of profits. Google is doing this at the behest of government. Google is doing this because it thinks that that's what Uncle Sam wants it to do. That's because we have all kinds of regulations involving, avoiding discrimination. And we're all in favor of not discriminating against people or oppressing people because of their race or their sex or anything else. But when the government looks at it, they can't figure out a way to systematize it. So they have to say the only way we can measure this is by outcome. So if 50% of your employees aren't female, then you've got a problem. So you've got to do something to get that number to 50%. And this guy who wrote the memo at Google was basically saying it may not be possible to do that because of just the demographics and the differences between men and women and how education works and all that kind of stuff. And he's blackballed. Google is cowering at the feet of big government and saying, please don't hurt us. We'll be glad to sacrifice this guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, you may be onto something, but I also think that Google, if they aren't already, is becoming a big part of what I call the Democrat media complex. But
that's right.
We'll see how that plays out. At the beginning of the segment, I mentioned Apple, and Apple kind of reminds me of IBM or General Motors back in those companies' heyday. And the federal government had looked at using antitrust to break up IBM and to break up General Motors, not because they were a monopolist, but just because they were big. But because GM sold cars and because IBM sold computers, physical objects, competitors came along pretty quickly and gobbled up their businesses. The Japanese came along with smaller, more fuel-efficient cars when that's what people wanted, and GM went never quite recovered. And the same thing happened to IBM and the dawn of the personal computer. So I don't really worry about Apple as much as I worry about Google and Facebook. But there is this conundrum of how do you break up a network, and you really can't, no matter how oppressive they may be to their customers and now even their employees. But I did think of this. Why does Google own your data? Why does Facebook own your data? Because they make your money off of your clicks, which they then sell to advertisers to put up, as Steve Jobs called it, crappy little banner ads. And what instead maybe we should do is pressure Congress to pass a Data Protection Act where Google and Facebook have to share their massive profits with their massive users. You would get a check every month from your Google account and your Facebook account that would reflect your share of the profits they generated off of your clicks. This would put the big pinch on their bottom lines. It would put money in your pockets that you earn through your mouse clicks, and I don't know, it's so crazy it just might work. And that's your members angle, or members only right angle for this week on our digital robber barons. This is brought to you by the paying members of BillWhittle.com, and we're opening this one up to the public because we think the message is just that important this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
It took just a couple of weeks for the left's newfound distaste for free speech to start spreading into new areas, not just hate groups, but people they just disagree with. After Charlottesville, online payment platform PayPal announced it would deny service to so-called hate groups. So this week, they cut off service to Jihad Watch. It's not a hate group, not even close, just a site that's worried about radical Islam. Service was eventually restored after there was an outcry online, but it's not a reassuring sign. Robert Spencer is the man this happened to. He founded Jihad Watch, and he joins us now. So, Robert, you were denounced as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a completely ersatz, phony, left-wing lobby group posing as a human rights organization, totally dishonest. And then what happened next?
Well, a reporter from ProPublica, which is a Soros-funded publication, contacted me, pointed out that Jihad Watch has a donation link via PayPal, as well as my books for sale at Amazon.com and Newsmax news links, and said, what would you do if all this was cut off because you're a hate group, as according to the Southern Poverty Law Center? And I tried to actually reason with this reporter, Lauren Kirchner, and tell her the implications of what she was suggesting, and saying that if you are allowing that people with unpopular political opinions be cut off from these platforms, you better hope it doesn't turn on you and your positions don't become unpopular sometime in the future. But she published her article. It led off with me, denounced me, noted the Southern Poverty Law Center's absolutely spurious claim that I'm some sort of hate group leader, and within hours I was notified by PayPal that I could no longer use their platform.
What was so remarkable about the ProPublica piece, the Lauren Kirchner piece that you're referring to, which I just read, is that at no point does it describe in any detail the views that are supposedly hateful that you hold. It didn't. It just described you as a member or the leader of a hate group, but it never told viewers or readers what that means. It was, by definition, propaganda. It was garbage. Did you complain about this?
Oh, yeah, sure. I wrote about it at Jihad Watch and pointed out that Lauren Kirchner had not made any effort to verify whether the Southern Poverty Law Center was right or not about whether I'm a hate group. The left seems to consider the Southern Poverty Law Center infallible in matters of who's a hate group and who isn't. But nobody asks, well, wait a minute, who's watching the Watchmen? Yeah. What are the biases of this supposed neutral arbiter?
So I actually went to the Southern Poverty Law Center website. It hurt me to do that, but for the purposes of this segment, I made myself. And went to the entry on you, and because I wanted to know. I mean, if you're saying things that I'm appalled by, I don't want to have you on, or I want to call you on them anyway on the air. I couldn't find anything in your write-up that was even particularly controversial or out of bounds. Do you know what exactly they're holding up as an example of your hatefulness?
Well, I think that what we have here is the left's very common tendency to take statements that are absolutely true that they don't like and portray them as hateful. One of the main things that I say in my work is that the jihadis are working from real traditions within Islam. They're not all Muslims by any means and all that. Not all Muslims are terrorists or believe in what the jihadis believe in, but the jihadis can and do point to the texts and teachings of Islam to justify violence and make recruits among peaceful Muslims. Now, this is an obvious fact that I've documented thousands of times on Jihad Watch, but as far as the left goes, if you even suggest that Islam is not a religion of peace, or that might not be a religion of peace in every conceivable way, then you're a hate monger and a bigot and an Islamophobe.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali was also listed on the SPLC website as a hater. This is someone who, of course, grew up in Somalia, and was the victim of female genital mutilation, but for criticizing that religion, she's a hater. Really quickly, can you think of any examples of people who've criticized, I don't know, Christianity, who are on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website as leaders of hate groups?
You know, not only do they not have any, but of course leftists in general celebrate that sort of thing. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist writer, a critic of Christianity, critic of Islam, critic of all religions and religion itself. He was recently disinvited from a speech in California because the organizers found out he criticized Islam. They thought it was great when he criticized Christianity, but criticizing Islam has been set up as the third rail, the thing you must not touch in the American public square.
Why do the elites in our society hate themselves so much and hate our society so much, do you think?
I think that it comes from the idea of a certain kind of guilt over success. Yeah. And that the West has been very successful, and its culture is celebrated all over the world, and they feel guilty about that and think that we have to apologize and bring in all these other cultures to make up for this.
It's really sick. I wish Freud were still around for a diagnosis. Thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on being back.
American reporter goes to Venezuela, comes back with the story of a lifetime, but not the one she expected to tell. Hi, this is Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Well, Hannah Dreier, an Associated Press reporter, back in 2014 went to Venezuela, half convinced that the media was conspiring to tell a false tale about the regime of Nicolas Maduro, who was the successor to Hugo Chavez, the famous socialist dictator of Venezuela. She was convinced that things couldn't be half as bad as the media was saying it was, and in fact, she moved into a neighborhood where things seemed to be doing pretty well. There's lots of arts, lots of entertainment, lots of wealthy people. In fact, the biggest problem that her neighbors and friends down there seemed to suffer was from an epidemic of obesity, because they were just eating all the time, and there were plenty to go around for everybody. Well, that was then. A year later, she starts noticing things like her friends seem to have lost 10 to 15 pounds, and more of her friends and associates were telling stories about being mugged or robbed or having their houses burglarized. Eventually, she was mugged in broad daylight by two guys on a motorcycle who just drove up and robbed her. Her friends kind of laughed it off and said, "Oh yeah, that's kind of a good robbery because nobody got hurt." Little by little, she watched, in her mind anyway, Venezuela descend into a hellish dog-eat-dog kind of existence where people were, beating up other people in the streets because they butted in line to pick through the garbage. Well, this is a tale that is familiar to anybody who's ever studied history and seen what happens when socialism takes hold. But it was apparently a surprise to this journalist. And I just thought it was a cautionary tale. And this woman's, by the way, the takeaway, when Hannah Dreier came back, she said her takeaway from it is that when you think things can't get any worse, when you think that certainly now things have gotten as bad as they can get and change will have to happen, you're wrong. Ugh. Things can always get worse. Stephen Green, is it just the naivete of an idealistic journalist going to Venezuela that she might think that things couldn't be that bad, and if they were, they couldn't get any worse, or is there something else at work here?
Well, the definition of a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged by a socialist. All I can say to this lovely lady is welcome to the club. I'm not going to indulge in any I told you so's or any of that. I'm sorry she had to witness what she did. I hope she keeps telling the truth about it. Look, the fact is, socialism always feels good at first. There really is more wealth being spread around. There's more food being spread around. What they don't tell you is that it feels that way because they're feeding you the seed corn for next year's harvest. That's why it always ends in starvation. Sometimes accidentally, because they're eating the seed corn. Sometimes on purpose, like Stalin's forced famine in the Ukraine, because they lock up the seed corn and don't let the enemies of the people eat. But one way or another, this is where socialism leads every single time. And I don't mean social welfare states like Denmark or Norway or Sweden or any of that. That's a capitalist society with a huge welfare state bolted on top. And capitalism can produce an awful lot of excess wealth, to borrow a phrase of Marx's that I hate. It can create enough wealth to sustain a really huge welfare state. So let's not conflate socialism with welfare spending. They're two entirely different things. That said, here's my fear going forward as Venezuela approaches its inevitable collapse and all the hardship, misery, and death that's going to bring. But, the left, when they were done lionizing Stalin after Khrushchev denounced him in the mid 1950s, and that leaked out to the West, the leftists in this country and in the West couldn't defend Stalin any longer. It became politically impossible to do when even the Communist Party of the Soviet Union wasn't defending him any longer. But instead, what they did was they started to portray Stalin as the brute who sold out Lenin's noble revolution for the people. And I have the feeling that's what is going to happen with Maduro and Chavez. Chavez is going to become the Lenin to Maduro's Stalin. Maduro is the bad guy who ruined the beautiful socialist experiment that Chavez brought to the people, when in fact he's the inevitable result of Chavezism.
Well, and Steve, Hannah Dreier found exactly that when she talks to people on the streets, or when she was still there, she talked to people on the streets, and she would find that people would actually tear up at the mention of Hugo Chavez's name. He is still lionized. He's still hailed as practically a god man. And,
so it's happening already.
And that they're disappointed that, Nicolas Maduro has sort of, dropped the ball on the great society that young Chavez was creating. Now, Bill Whittle, Hannah Dreier said something that was really telling. She said, in 2015, I no longer had to go out to find the impact of what was happening in Venezuela. I only needed to look out my window where there was a lynching going on in the street. It came home to her. It came to an upper middle class neighborhood that she had specifically moved into for the security that it provided. And now it was on her doorstep. The exchange rate used to be officially at that time was 10 bolivars per US dollar, but on the black market it was 10,000. When she walked to a restaurant to get something to eat, she would literally carry a shopping bag with bundles of bolivars and would hand it to the waiter. The waiter wouldn't even count it. They didn't have time. They could not have possibly counted all the money. And so the thing is utterly broken down. The whole society, the murder rate is through the roof. But here's the thing. Their number one source of income in Venezuela is petroleum products. Petroleum, and their biggest customer for petroleum is the United States of America. Now, President Trump has said he's personally cutting off Maduro's personal wealth overseas to the extent that the U.S. has control over that. But we're still pumping money into Venezuela. If we do that, we prop up Maduro. If we don't, people could starve even more. What's the right thing to do here, Bill?
You would want to say we should assist the people of Venezuela, but from the story, sounds like Ms. Dreier, as an individual in the society in general, that there are none as blind as those who will not see. When she wrote the story, Scott, did she ever mention that socialism had destroyed Venezuela and she watched it happen? Did she ever say that?
Yeah, she got around to that. But at the beginning, she said she was just kind of putting out dry reports, but she said they weren't getting picked up by the U.S. media. So instead of saying things about statistics about starvation and stuff like that, she started telling individual stories. The girl who goes to the hospital because she skinned her knee, but she can't get antibiotics and winds up dying as a result of it. But those got traction.
I don't think that in any of these anybody really made the case that this is the inevitable result of socialism and that Venezuela, given its tremendous petroleum resources, could have been the richest country in the hemisphere south of the U.S. border, but instead is the poorest. Average Venezuelans have lost 18 pounds. They've gone into the zoos, broken into the zoos to kill the zoo animals for food. So obviously, we can draw some conclusions from this, that socialism works beautifully. It's just that the Venezuelans didn't do it right. And it turns out that the Nicaraguans didn't do it right either. And the Cubans didn't do it right. And the Vietnamese didn't do it right. And the Cambodians didn't do it right. And the Chinese didn't do it right.
I'm sensing a trend here, right. Bill.
And not only did it result in catastrophe, but it results in murder because they're not doing it right. Just as a very quick point to Steve, what Steve said about Stalin and the perception that Stalin ruined Lenin's, perfect revolution. the Cheka, which became the secret police, the execution of people who were known to be innocent, show trials, enforced starvation, lying to the international community. These are all Lenin's direct orders. Lenin created the state that Stalin took over. So let me just say this, because I think that the thing here is, why are people just unable to learn this lesson? I read a very interesting book about Stalin, a very detailed book about Stalin. And by the way, it looks like the most dangerous occupation in all of history was to be related to Joseph Stalin in any way, shape, or form. He closed this book with a brief line from a woman, and I'm doing this from memory, but it is very, very close to what I'm about to say. This woman said, well, the system killed my husband, took out and shot, killed my husband, killed 2 of my sons, killed 2 of my brothers, killed all of my grandchildren, my aunt, my mother, and my sister. But yet I still believe in it. And she's serious. She's not joking around. Yeah. She does still believe in it. She does still believe in it. What do you say to people like that? There's something wrong with them. What do you say to somebody like that who simply can't learn the lesson? And as you were pointing out, Steve, it became impolitic to support Stalin. So one of the people that they supported was Castro. See, Castro, unlike Stalin, he just shot a few people. He didn't mass murder anybody. And he's a simple man of the people, Fidel Castro. And you can tell he's a simple man of the people because you always see him in the same green tunic. I don't want to run this super long, but let me just say 2 things. First of all, when Fidel Castro died, he had $800 million in his personal bank account, which is not bad for being a man of the people who never really worked in terms of creating anything for his people. But I had some friends who went down to Cuba. So here's how socialism works, folks. They went down and spoke to a cab driver. They were assigned a cab driver. He was with them 24 hours a day. This is what happens today in Cuba, not 20 years ago. This is what happens today. In order to drive a cab, this man has to buy a permit from the government. That permit costs $3,000 a month. And if he doesn't pay $3,000 a month to the Castros, he loses his permit and he's not able to work anymore. Now, because it's a socialist country, the Cuban government does provide him with a monthly salary. And that monthly salary for everybody is $50 a month. But as a cab driver, it goes to $100 a month. So he gets $50 to $100 a month, like every other Cuban citizen, from the government. But he has to pay the government $3,000 US per month in order to drive a cab. That money goes to Castro so Fidel can die with $800 million. Now, you would think, why would somebody do that? Because this man has to work. He has to work 20-hour days every day. He takes Sunday off. He has to work 20 hours a day to keep making enough money to continue to buy that license. Well, he works that way because it's a better life than the alternative. That's socialism. That's the reality of socialism. And if you're one of these liberal people who look at, as Steve said, look at socialism as a great idea, what you're doing is you are talking about butchering the calf of capitalism, having yourself a fine old feast, and then being left with nothing but bones and wondering what happened. And gee, I had no idea, and I guess they didn't do it right.
Hey, Scott, can I throw in one more thing that Bill?
Yes, please do.
Or no, you reminded me of this before Bill's question. When I was 15 years old, summer of '84, I spent a month in West Germany, a country which, of course, no longer exists, and we did a day trip from West Berlin into East Berlin, and you had to exchange. They forced you to do this at the checkpoint. 25 perfectly good West German marks for 25 worthless East German marks, and you had to spend them there in East Berlin. You weren't allowed to bring anything back with you. Now, at the time, 25 West German marks was about $10, and the unofficial exchange rate was about 3 to 1 East to West marks. So I was really getting about $3.30 to spend in East Berlin. And having spent a day there, I couldn't spend all my money. We had to talk the border guards into letting us bring the money back or leaving it with them because there was nothing to buy. I couldn't spend $3 in a day. And East Berlin was the wealthiest city in the wealthiest socialist country that has ever existed.
The greatest thing ever said about communism is that communism could make poor people out of Germans, and I think that's absolutely right.
It could make Germans make Trabants.
Well, I will say that if there are any New York cabbies watching this show, when Bill Whittle was talking, they were going, A cab medallion for only $3,000 a month? Not bad.
Yeah, well, welcome to New York City, comrades.
But you can earn a little bit more money driving a cab in New York than you can in Havana. You know, what it made me think of when I saw this Hannah Dreier story, and she does this interview that I think is very genuine. And I'm like Steve, I'm not going to smack her down for her idealism going in, and I think her eyes were open in the course of doing things, and she got to feel the real impact of what was happening there. I haven't read all of her stories, so I don't know, per Bill's question, whether she accurately said, hey, these are the consequences of socialism. I think it is more likely that she credited that to the Maduro dictatorship than she did to the actual ideology itself. But what it made me think is, think of how many reporters we have in the United States of America packing into the White House briefing room, crowding into governors' mansions and cluttering up the hallways on Capitol Hill, reporting about the essentially trivia that happens on a day-to-day basis, when they could be in places like Venezuela, documenting the downfall of civilization at the hands of tyrants and fools. I hope one journalist is watching this show now and says, you know what, maybe I need to buy a plane ticket and go somewhere where I can see the impact of decisions that really affect people's lives and maybe be part of a clarion call to reverse that inevitable slide when you step into socialism and destroy the dignity of human beings. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching Right Angle. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making it possible.